Right.
Thank you, John. So I've got the pleasure of introducing the final panel of the morning. This is kind of an in-house group of people, of academics from the University of Plymouth. I'll introduce the first two because they're both from the Plymouth Business School, but also they've sent in pre-recordings because unfortunately they couldn't be with us today. So the first speaker will be Professor Sheila Agarwal, who's the co-director of the Centre for Coastal Communities and also a part of that Plymouth Business School. And the second speaker will be Dr. Stavros Karamperidis, who is a marine economist, who is also from the business school, but a board member for the Port of Plymouth. So we have a couple of pre-recordings that I think Sam will be able to play for us, and then I'll introduce the second two speakers afterwards.
Hi there, my name is Professor Sheila Agarwal. I'm a professor in the business school at the University of Plymouth, and I'm one of the co-directors for the Centre of Coastal Communities, which was one of the first centres to be set up in the UK. There is much to like about Plymouth as a place to live, as a place to work, and as a visitor destination. It has a very varied heritage, closely connected with the sea and with the maritime sector, particularly the naval industries and merchant shipping as well. And also some of the benefits of living and working in Plymouth is that it is a gateway to the countryside as well, with the Tamar Valley and also Dartmoor just being on its doorstep. So it's that combination of sea, of land, of rurality, which is really really the key ingredients of a successful tourist destination, from my perspective. There are a number of challenges, and I guess Plymouth isn't unusual from other coastal cities in the UK. There are challenges concerning deprivation and poverty in Plymouth, and again, there are similar challenges in other coastal communities. Parts of Plymouth, some of the lower super areas, for example, are in the lowest, in the 1% of most deprived in the country, according to the indices of multiple deprivation. And that clearly then has knock-on impacts for health and educational outcomes for the people, for residents, particularly children and young people as well. Aside from the socioeconomic challenges, Plymouth has a big challenge in terms of reinventing itself, reorientating itself, or re-envisaging its futures, and transitioning away from the navy and defence industries, which has been contracting over a succession of years, and developing new industries, diversifying and exploiting some of the new kind of economic opportunities related to the blue economy that have developed, such as sustainable agriculture, or around floating offshore wind farms, for example, or some of the marine technology industries that again have been starting up. I guess it's that connection between the coast and between the land and between the town, the urban area, and also between the rural areas, I see as being a key. So, for example, I guess from a tourism perspective, Plymouth is an ideal destination for using it as a base for touring. You could have a city-urban experience. It has a huge number of hidden gems within, embedded within the heritage and the urban fabric of Plymouth. But also, you can explore the surrounding coastal areas and the sort of the rural hinterland surrounding it as well. So I guess from a tourist perspective, It certainly is one of the key strengths, and of course, there are developments to try and attract cruise tourists now, as well. So the kind of tourism offer that Plymouth can develop is quite diverse now, and it's not necessarily based on seasonality. Some of these markets can be developed for off-season, thereby contributing to productivity and more secure, stable jobs within the tourism and hospitality sector as well. I think there are other strengths around the sort of the maritime sector, or the marine sector, I should say. We have emerging tech industries within that sector already, which are highly successful. And again, I think if we can build kind of like an ecosystem of supporting industries around that, then there is great potential for economic growth and regeneration. And for Plymouth to really be known as that coastal community or that coastal city that specialises, in the marine kind of sphere. That's kind of what I've already, I guess, alluded to in terms of, joining up the blue and the green economies, as well. I think it would be, I think it would be great. That is a challenge in itself, in the sense that there is a skills deficit within those sectors. And therefore, there needs to be a great deal of work to get that skill base in place so that the local people can benefit from these industries which are just on their doorstep, rather than sort of recruiting from areas outside as well. So there are great opportunities, but there are also great challenges in terms of linking up the two economies together.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Bob, for the kind invitation. It's a great honor to be here with you. Sorry for not being able to be physically, but unfortunately I have to be in Brussels for another meeting. Modern life and modern problems. But as we're talking about those modern problems, I think it's going to be a good idea to discuss about how we can go forward with Plymouth. My name is Stavros Karaberidis. I'm the head of the Maritime Transport Research Group and lecturer at the University of Plymouth. Oh, it's a very nice city. It's a nice vibe city, I would say, with an amazing waterfront that gives a lot of opportunities to go out to explore, to do sailing. As you can probably see from the title and the position I'm having at the university, I'm slightly biased because a maritime element and the background, of course, provides that information. I like shipping a lot, so it's very interesting for me to see a lot of vessels passing outside my window on a daily basis. The Port of Plymouth, as you know, is in the top 20 in the UK. So a lot of cargo is being transported from the port itself. Nearly 60% of the cargo capacity in the port is oil. And that's why you may have seen a lot of oil tanks. If you go down to Barbican, on the left-hand side, you will see a lot of oil tanks there that are distributing a lot of oil in the region. And of course, I like the fact that you can go out and get a lot of fresh sea air, and you can enjoy a lot of nice seafood. The Port of Plymouth is the second biggest fishing port in the country, so there's a lot of variety of fish that's available in the city. Oh, that's very interesting. As an economist, I would like to talk about short-term and long-term challenges. Short-term challenges are, they're multidimensional. As we're talking about the waterfront and the interaction between the water element and the sea, the fact that the connections, for example, are not great for the city, so it's not easy to get into the city, and we're talking about that this specific week. That, for example, rail connections are cut. We had a big conference a couple of days ago, and most of the people had to take a bus replacement from Tiverton to come down to Plymouth. So it was nearly 2 hours bus ride from Tiverton to come down here. So city suffers, especially after the closure of the airport, suffers in terms of connectivity with the rest of the country. And it's kind of difficult for people to get in and out. Of course, the moment you're in Plymouth, you have been trapped from the germ. You know, it's such a beautiful city. You can see so many things. You can explore the city a lot. You can take a lot of the local ferries. You can go to some nice beaches that are existing. But the problem is the transportation getting in. And of course, wearing the head of the chairman for the Charter Institute Logistics and Transport, I cannot bypass that issue. You know, it's like even going down to the beachfront, for example, is difficult. You know, not a lot of buses are existing to serve a lot of the areas. It's very easy to go to the city center. Of course, the city center is not far away from the waterfront, but still it's a big distance. And of course, it's hilly. People with difficulties, it's difficult to go there. If you have wheelchair, it's kind of difficult to climb up the hill. If it's, of course, not one of those that they've been supported with any motorized ways and things like that. So I think improving the overall connection, both for the people willing to explore the waterfront and connecting the waterfront with the rest of the city, I think is one of the imminent actions that we could probably take. If we're talking long term, of course, we have to consider the climate change, how the climate change is going to change, raise of the water levels, what's going to happen. You know, several times we see when it's a high tide, some kind of small floodings in some places. So if the water, for example, is going to increase for a meter or so, what's going to be the impact to the local businesses? There are some nice restaurants by the waterfront. If water comes up, what's going to be the case? How we're preparing for that? You know, it's like there's a lot of discussion. And recently I hosted a podcast about the impact of global warming and especially the sea rising into the port infrastructure, how as ports and as communities we're ready to tackle that kind of issues. I think those are the two challenges I'm seeing. Plymouth has a very long history and very good connections with the maritime element. And I think that's one of the strongest parts. You know, it's like the last couple of years I'm living in the region, I never had a visitor visiting the city and said, wow, why we haven't been here before? You know, it's like, I think we have to do something with the branding and promote it a bit more because, you know, it's a hidden gem for the overall country. But at the same time, it's not only promoting, it's also trying to make it look better because, you know, you try, for example, to walk down to the waterfront and you see a lot of things that they need a bit of policing. You know, that's the kind of, if you're having a shop, that's the shopping window of the city, let's put it that way. And that's where you have to present everything. You know, we have, for example, a lot of people coming with cruise, and I know that the harbour master, for example, in the Port of Plymouth specifically, are working very hard to attract a lot of tourist and cruise sector. But in order to do that, we need to make the city to look pretty. It's not that it's not pretty, but you know, we have, for example, to provide better facilities in various locations. And that's an issue that probably we have to consider, and we have to consider it holistically as an ecosystem. So, for example, when someone is landing into the city, how you can go from point A to point B, think about the connections, the transportation links. If you want to cross from one place to another, are there water links? For example, if you want to go from Barbican across to Mountbatten, how often the taxi is coming? If you want to go somewhere else, if there's any other facilities. It's very nice. The last couple of years, we've seen also some water taxis, not water taxis, water services that are between Barbican and Royal William Yard, for example, which is an amazing place to go and do activities. That kind of stuff, it would be nice to see. And of course, if you go to other cities, like, I don't, of course, to make the analogy, but you go to New York, for example, or other cities that they have that kind of water element around them, they have that kind of connections and links. And I think having that is going to bring the overall architecture that is existing around Plymouth, and we can level up the overall heritage that's existing. As I said, slightly biased because I'm coming from a maritime background. I would like to see that kind of maritime links coming along. And of course, just to remind you, the maritime links are having the smallest environmental footprint. Of course, if we replace that with an electric bus, then the environmental footprint is zero. But if you're having a normal bus compared with a maritime asset, then of course the maritime asset has the advantage. But as you can imagine, deploying that kind of assets, if there's not critical mass there, if we don't have a lot of tourists or a lot of traction, it's not going to be economic viable for someone to operate the service. And that's why I suppose we're not having a very frequent service at the moment. Other ways, but of course, when you're talking about systems that provide transportation in a city, you have to think how those systems are combined. Give you a great example from London. Yes, you have the tube that's providing amazing service, but then you have buses that are complementing, so you can reach to your final destination. So we can have a hub and spoke system that you can have, like, for example, vessels delivering from one part of the city to the other, the people, and then with the bus network to have that kind of interlink. The problem is, as we know already, that kind of system doesn't exist. It's like if you want to jump from the bus to the boat and from the boat to the bus, that is not possible. And we tried to make a project a year and a half ago to try to find out how we can integrate the systems together. And unfortunately, we haven't really managed to do something about it yet. I hope we can do something in the future because I think that would be something very beneficial and for the overall city, because integrating those two links will give the ability for people to have better mobility, and by having better mobility, we'll see more people moving around, and by having that kind of movement, more local cafeterias will be benefited, local restaurants will be benefited, more people are going to be around and will give vibe to the city.
Our third speaker is here today, I think, and this is Professor Sheena Asthana. She is also a co-director for the Centre for Coastal Communities and a director here at the Centre for Health and Technology at the University of Plymouth.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to such an interesting day with amazing talks. Just want to pick up, before I start my slides, on a couple of things that have come up. The one, I think, was mentioned by Hannah, of the need for a really holistic approach to understanding places like Plymouth. And I'm really going to give you a health perspective. I'm a professor of health policy. Health is my bag. But it's really interesting looking at things from a health perspective because, of course, health services play a very small role in overall health status. If we look at the broader social, health determinants, we're talking about economics, culture, we're talking about social, we're talking about environment. So some of the things that you've been talking about already are really, really important to understanding kind of the health challenges that cities such as Plymouth are facing. The second thing I wanted to pick up is, I think Elaine was talking about funding, the kind of constant call for funding. And I do think that academic partnerships actually offer a really good way of levering in funding for different things. We can certainly see some of the research councils are starting to be much more open to co-design, to consultation, to getting public involvement from our local authority partners, our VCSE partners, etc. And the others are sort of coming along in that way. So I think this is a really interesting space for partnerships between the many, many different stakeholders that are in this room and the academic sector. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to sort of basically, health, I think, is a really highly productive, with marine, very, very productive area of research in the University of Plymouth. And I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of some of the projects, but some of which are in collaboration with groups who are already here. Because I'm going to focus less on Plymouth and more on coastal health and the real challenges that we're now seeing in coastal health outcomes, which I think reflect the broader challenges that coastal areas are facing at the moment. Because I am a director of a Centre for Health Technology, I'm going to introduce the scope for digital health technologies here, and bizarrely try to kind of link to the sea, in a sort of slightly creative kind of way, but we'll get there, and then look at how we can join things up. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, just a very, very quick slide. This is some of the current projects. I think a part of this one ended last year, but really a whole load of projects which are around the coast or coastal areas. These are all ones that I've been involved with, so I apologise to the likes of my marine colleagues. There'll be many, many more. But the point is that we are connecting with issues that are really of significant interest to you. The Plymouth Health Determinants Research Collaboration, I do want to flag. So this is a large project. It's the aim of which is to raise research capacity and evaluation capacity around the determinants of health. Elaine, I know we're starting to talk to you about the National Marine Park. Hannah, cultural aspects of health. We really do we want to connect. We've got a very large staff. We're also Matt is also a partner on this. We're very, very into this idea of human learning systems, of doing things in different ways, challenging that very top-down approach to policy. So there's some really great stuff going on. So just to be aware of that, and do please kind of get in touch if you're interested in collaborating on that. This was a project last year, but again, I thought it was absolutely brilliant in terms of some of the ideas that came up about addressing coastal challenges. And I'll come back to that in a minute in terms of how we can start to explore how to improve health outcomes. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Like I said, health is quite an interesting one to look at from a holistic point of view, but it's also really becoming this growing awareness, particularly since the Chief Medical Officer's report in 2021, Chris Whitty's report, of the fact that actually our coastal areas have amongst the worst health outcomes in the country. And it's really interesting because if you start to look at people's understanding their mental maps, they inevitably look at, they'll assume that lowest life expectancy, highest rates of disease, etc., are in our inner city areas. And this is really not the case. And this type of work is it's interesting because, again, from the Research Council point of view, there's been an awful lot of calls for work on coastal and rural areas. So I think there's a real opportunity here for us to get into partnerships and respond to these types of areas. So growing evidence of health inequalities between coastal and non-coastal areas. This partly reflects a shift in the pattern of deprivation. And this is, again, interesting from a kind of coastal point of view because I'll come to this presently, but, loss of industry, perhaps loss of cultural belonging, that kind of lack of future salience. I think many of our areas are going through similar things to the Rust Belt, actually, in America, in terms of not having that sense of, well, we've always worked in the steel industry, we've always worked in the coal industry, and we've lost our industries and we're not necessarily replacing them with anything. And I think that's really hard for people, particularly young people, who struggle to see what their future looks like. The other issue that we've got in Devon as a whole is a off-the-scale rate of suicide amongst young people. And I think there's something going on about that lack of direction, loss of aspiration, loss of expectation, and a sense of just being generally left behind. So this is a really, really important issue that we need to grasp and understand. Part of this, of course, is the fact that we have a much older population, not Plymouth as necessarily, but in the southwest as a whole. Plymouth is one of the younger areas because it's a city. I've talked about the shift in deprivation. But something else is going on. And my husband and I, who worked on the Chris Whitty report, we did the health status. And he's saying, well, it's not the smell of the sea, is it? I mean, what is going on here? We controlled out for deprivation, for socioeconomic status, deprivation for demography, for ethnicity, and still we were seeing a coastal excess in morbidity and mortality. What exactly is going on? And I think it's when we don't know, actually, which is what makes the kind of holistic work that we need to do much, much more interesting. We're also dealing with a kind of real crisis in terms of health and social care funding. So those of you who are in the council in social care will be aware of the portion of overall local authority budget that now goes on to a relatively small percentage of the population. I have the honour of sitting as a NED on Devon ICB, and we are generally referred to as the most challenged healthcare system in the country. So we're on the naughty step as far as NHSE is concerned, effectively requiring very, very close direction. And I don't think we'll ever get out of being on the naughty step because of some of the challenges that we're talking about here. So because we're on the naughty step, we've got to recognise the need, in fact everybody does, to shift what we call shift left, stop spending all our money on expensive, reactive hospital treatment and start to move towards prevention, early diagnosis, etc. within the community. And here again, I'm hoping some of you are thinking, blue prescribing or something like this. In other words, the connections start to emerge here. And this is a particularly urgent issue, as I've mentioned, because we're on the naughty step. But I think also coastal areas can provide some innovative solutions. And I'm hoping to try to talk about some of those. Can I have the next slide, please? I just wanted to show you this because this is actually really shocking, actually, some of this data. So these are tables we produced for Chris Whitty's report in 2021. On the top, you've got a kind of effectively coastal excess, coastal areas compared to non-coastal areas. And what you can see, this is for standardised mortality, significantly higher mortality when you control out for age and sex than in non-coastal areas. And similarly in life expectancy. There's something weird is going on here, and we don't fully understand why. Could I have the next slide, please? This was a horrendous slide. So this is outcomes for children and young people. You can see that coastal kids are less likely to have GCSE plus qualifications and less likely to progress into higher education. If you look at that difference in terms of the coastal excess of here, we've got hospital admissions for self-harm, age 10 to 24. These are admissions for drugs, and these are admissions for alcohol. Something is going on in the coast, and we need to understand this. And I think health actually pulls people's attention, and certainly pulls national policy attention. So I think it's a good way of actually starting to say, what can we do about this? Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so going back to the holistic point, I don't really fully understand why our coastal health outcomes are so bad. Like I said, it can't be the smell of the sea. What we do know is there's a whole load of interrelated factors going on. So there's something about, I think, poor educational outcomes, the loss of traditional industry, perhaps the sort of loss of cultural connection, the distance, the peripherality, the actually policy, expenditure, resource allocation, a whole load of things like that. So effectively, what we have is a very complex, interrelated set of problems which would suggest a need for holistic working, a need for multi-sectoral working. But the other thing I feel is that actually what it means is that we can come in different entry points. So we may have an economic intervention, we may have a social intervention or a cultural intervention, and one would hypothesize that would have broader distributional effects, benefits on other aspects. So in other words, it's really worth us working together, and we can start to use some of our kind of proximate indicators. There might be sort of indicators of health. We won't see changes for 30 years in things like addressing children's adverse childhood experiences, but we can start to monitor some sort of in-between impacts. So just kind of giving you some examples here of stimulating sectors with high multiplier effects. That's why I'm going to talk about digital health technologies in the next slide. I haven't quite got to the next slide, actually. It's all right. I think there are some really, really interesting things about education and the way in which our education system's not necessarily working for kids who do not grow up with high levels of traditional educational capital, whose families have not traditionally got much out of formal education, and who are just put off, particularly with the sort of recent changes to the curriculum. Something we're just identifying recently as part of a big ESRC project actually is housing. So we know about housing affordability issues. We need to triangulate that with the fact that although housing affordability in terms of wage against cost of housing is worse in London, London has high levels of social housing. We do not. So in other words, our access to housing for people with limited budgets is really, really problematic, and we need to triangulate that. That might be another entry point that we can start looking at housing in different ways. And finally, lots of interest in the environmental, whether we're talking about blue and green prescribing or offshore renewable energy, a whole load of different things. So in other words, we need to think holistically, think outside the box. Can I have the next slide, please? I have to talk about digital health technologies because I direct a Centre for Health Technology, and this is my passion at the moment. I'm really excited about what we can produce. And also I think that Plymouth is going to be on the map about this. So we've just set up what we call a living lab. And this is an opportunity for basically industry, academia and health and care partners and citizens to get together to co-design health tech. What often happens is that health tech is not user-friendly. People don't want to use it. It's a bit like the digital Wild West out there. So you kind of get these digital snake oil salesmen knocking on your door saying, hey, I've got a great product. And can you show me why and how? Where's the evidence? And they haven't got it. So the idea about the lab is it offers opportunities for industry to co-design with the end user, to work with academia, to evaluate, to pilot, evaluate, change that prototype and help them with a value proposition. Now, this is quite important for local businesses because although most of the tech industry is based in London and Manchester and Cambridge, and it does tend to spatially concentrate, it doesn't have to. The whole point about being a tech industry is you can locate anywhere. And I think that if we look at this as a high multiplier effect industry, this is something that we could be looking at for Plymouth. We've got really strong academic expertise. We've also in our Plymouth Living Lab got the biggest living lab in the world. So this is kind of basically been created in partnership with Plymouth Living Home Community Homes, 36,000 people of all sorts of different cohorts. So it's really, really exciting. This is my really, really exciting. And we can do all sorts of things to support earlier diagnosis. We could start doing better care, addressing the loneliness, a whole load of things like that. What's possibly of interest from the sort of C point of view is the evidence that we know that using things like VR, augmented VR, and can actually connect people to the natural environment, to sea, to coastal environments, marine environments, etc. There's decent evidence to suggest an increase in mental health, pain relief, physical exercise, a whole load of things like that. And I've got a wonderful young team who are producing amazing things, such as, you can swim with, in the underwater, you can swim with the fishes through a VR thing, you can walk across Dartmoor with other people in different places, you can visit National Trust properties and other historical homes. We can start to actually use these types of technologies, not just to improve health, but perhaps also to stimulate our tourism industry. So certainly in other parts of the world, you can go and visit a museum, or you can visit something by VR before you actually go into that. Why don't we do the same thing here to try to kind of actually really show people? We've all talked about our beautiful marine environment. We can start to produce stuff to actually support, again, that tourist industry as well as the tech industry. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is my last slide. How do we join things up? I think it's so complicated. We all know that everything is interrelated. The evidence, as I said, it's not the smell of the sea, but we don't know what it is. We do not know why our health outcomes are so poor. Got pretty good ideas about some of those factors, and they're complex. They're complex and they're interrelated. So we need to talk together. We need to work together and think in a holistic way. We also need to work outside silos. So in other words, the whole point about interdisciplinary, intersectoral working, getting people outside their little boxes to really look at our connections. And I think that's something we're actually quite good at doing as an academic group. There are a need to reduce competition, and I guess you guys, if you're not in academia, think, academia must be so lovely, it'll be all collaborative, and it's really pretty dog eat dog, particularly between different institutions. So we kind of need to work together. I think things like the HDRCs, the Health Determinant Research Collaborations, are a really good example here, because I'm the academic lead for Cornwall. I do also for Plymouth. I'm a co-app on the Cornwall one as well. But, this is a great opportunity for us to start to get together. As I've mentioned, let's think out of the box. How many of you knew that digital health technology could be so exciting? Because it really is. It's amazing. And just explore, opportunities. It doesn't just have to be through tech opportunities. We've got Living Lab. We've got a test bed for doing things differently. And I think that's really, really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. We do have one more speaker who again can't be with us today. Professor Richard Thompson, OBE. He's the director of the Marine Institute, which we've heard a lot about today. And he's going to talk about some of his projects that relate to this idea of co-joining city, land and sea. And then we'll have some questions.
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. And I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person. There's a clash that takes me elsewhere today. I come to this as a marine biologist, and I came to Plymouth as a marine biologist. To me, this is an amazing place to work as a marine biologist. But why is that? Well, my main interests are around interactions, particularly between humans and the environment. We've got a really rich history in Plymouth of humans living by the sea, going back thousands of years into more recent times. We've got potential exploitation and human impacts, whether that's mine waste, whether it's fishing, whether it's the port, a whole range of different interactions that we as humans have had with the natural environment. And that's one of the things that I've studied really throughout my career. So Plymouth's got a diversity of marine habitats, from really high diversity areas that are relatively pristine through to other areas that have higher impacts from human activity. It's also got really interesting geology. If we think about the flooded river valleys that create a really diverse range of habitats from really sheltered locations that are protected from wind and wave to some very, very exposed coastlines. And all of that influences the biology, the what lives where and why in the oceans is very much driven by that physical environment onto which us humans then kind of superimpose ourselves with our activities. So it's a really rich place to study, but also, of course, as a member of staff at the university, teaching the next generation of marine scientists is really key to me. So the very reasons that it makes it a great place to research marine biology also makes it a fantastic place to study marine biology. And we've seen that, over the centuries. You could go back to Darwin and the Beagle setting off from Plymouth. You could go back well over 100 years to the Marine Biological Association, founded here in Plymouth. Because of that rich diversity of species and questions that were being asked back in the 1800s about the availability of fish stocks to supply humans with the fish they needed for the generations to come. And since then, of course, in Plymouth, we've got Plymouth Marine Laboratory, we've got the UK's National Marine Aquarium, we've got the University of Plymouth with a great diversity of different research expertise in marine and different courses. And then on top of that, we've got organisations like the Diving Diseases Research Centre. So a really wide range of different aspects of both the study of the marine environment and education of the next generation of scientists. In terms of the marine environment, and this is true more broadly than just Plymouth, we've had a history, unfortunately, of seeing the oceans a little bit out of sight, out of mind. And that comes in two ways. One, this belief that we can pull lots of things out of the marine environment to satisfy human demand, whether that's protein from the fish we want to catch or minerals from the seabed. And because we can't see the associated damage, if there is any, and it's not to say all of our human activities are damaging, but if there is damage, we can't easily see it. And that means it kind of goes unnoticed. But then the flip side of that is we've also, unfortunately, used our oceans, again, it's not just Plymouth, it's worldwide, as a place to dump the things that we don't want anymore. And again, it's out of sight, out of mind. We can't see the potential damage that results. So, yeah, the concerns that I have in relation to human activity are as simple as over-exploitation of the resources that the oceans have, which we want to be sure are there for future generations to enjoy. But also, we've seen the oceans and used them as a place to dump our waste, and that simply isn't sustainable. One of the things that attracted me to Plymouth was the number and diversity of different organisations that were all working and researching the marine environment. And, it's everywhere from, the smallest microorganism to large marine mammals to effects on human health and well-being, a great diversity of different interests. And that also kind of makes for what I would say is it's a great collaborative centre to bring together arts and science and technology and innovation and industry to look at some of the challenges that I've spoken about getting the benefits of the ocean without causing too much damage, and also looking at waste entering the environment and making sure that we're protecting as much as we can the environment from that waste. So bringing together all of these people is a fantastic asset. It is the people, but it's also the diversity of different ways and different perspectives on the ocean that is, to me, essential if we're to find some of the solutions to those challenges. It's not just my perspective as a marine biologist, it's that collective perspective that gives you, so much more than the sum of the parts, quite literally. But, of course, in addition to that really rich history of marine research and understanding the marine environment in Plymouth goes back hundreds of years. Most recently, of course, we got the creation of the UK's first national marine park. And that's a fantastic opportunity for the city. It's a fantastic opportunity for the marine environment. But if I were to just look at it from a selfish perspective, as a scientist interested in studying the marine environment, it's an amazing opportunity for me. It almost creates an experimental system where we can look at together activities that might increase human engagement with the marine environment, but also perhaps the consequences of that increased engagement in terms of people's understanding, let's say, of the oceans and the benefits that come from the oceans. We can look at things like the way we create marine engineering structures. We can look at living seawalls, for example, that create extra opportunities for marine life, but also maybe add value from a point of view of the human dimension of what we see in the environment during low tide. So there's a whole range of different things that I see the marine park as a great experimental opportunity for me to learn about human interactions with the marine environment, how to get more out of that interaction, more benefit for humans, more benefit for the marine environment, avoiding the depletion and the harm that I've talked about so far. I mean, that is, in essence, to me, what a marine park's trying to do, is try to bring together the environment, society, and the economy to get the benefits without the harm and for the enrichment of all. And if we can learn from that process, then maybe there's a model that we can translate to other locations that are facing the same challenges. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways you can enable things. I mean, as a researcher, one of the things that really helps enable is research funding, to support the key questions we've got. And there's been some of the most rich experiences in my career have been when we've had funding opportunities that have allowed me to work on an aspect that affects the ocean alongside, I come as a marine biologist, but alongside, let's say, an engineer that builds structures in the ocean, and alongside a psychologist that looks at our human perceptions of both the biology and perhaps the engineering. It's been those collaborative work, and so it's been the funding to bring us together that has been created a key opportunity. But, that's not to say it can only be achieved with funding. Simply sitting down in the same room can take you a good step forward, but, you need a vehicle, an instrument to really propel that into active research that will deliver hard outcomes, and that tends to be driven by funding opportunities.
Because obviously three of our speakers are not here, we can have Bob, who interviewed the three speakers, is happy to kind of expand on anything. And I think also there's some project partners and collaborators that are in the room that might be able to chip in. But also Sheena she might want to come to the front with Bob and answer any questions about any of those four talks. Did anybody have anything? I was going to maybe start with just an observation where Sheila had mentioned the idea of the reinvention of Plymouth, and also Stavros talked about rebranding Plymouth. And I don't know if that's because they're from the business school, it's like a different language, but I think it was interesting they both mentioned it separately. Then my interpretation of some of the stuff that Sheena talked about was the idea of re-establishing that cultural connection that has been lost through whether it's industry or not understanding how we engage with that environment. But then going back to Richard, who talked about humans and environment, and I think those four things really relate well to one another, re-establishing what it means for humans to be with the environment. And is that part of the rebranding of Plymouth? I don't know if that can be a prompt for other questions or comments from Bob.
Apologies to those of you in the room that have heard me say this before, but I think it's a really important point. I don't think one can underestimate the impact of people on the loss of a job. And spoke previously at an event organized by Sheila Agarwal for Coastal Communities. Research on it suggests that the impact of that lasts up to 20 years. And that the impact carries through to the next generation. So some of the problems we've heard about today stem back to actually the beyond 20 years to the early 80s. And you were speaking about this earlier. Your father was last night, your father was part of a situation where there was this one day where I think the figure was 15,000 people lost their job. I don't know, a huge number. And suddenly, not just those individuals, but entire communities were wiped out. Devonport, Stonehouse, those problems exist till today. And was speaking with that, looking for Nick now in the audience, but the impact on kids in Stonehouse, looking across to Devonport High, and they say, we can't go there because they've already shut the door. So I think that whole notion of cultural identity is crucial. And I think this picks up on things that Hannah said. The way that we think about ourselves, our own sense of identity individually or as a community is key. And if you have this lack of efficacy that I can do it, we're lost. So finding ways to build up a sense of we can achieve, build on our strengths here, I think is just imperative. And I think things that Sheena's spoken about are just critical in that, building up that sense that we can find ways to enable quick wins, that people gain a sense of confidence. If they don't have that sense of confidence, I can stand up here, we can stand here all day, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to find ways to give people that sense of belief that Plymouth offers them something. Looking back at Hannah in the room, but work of NUD, Millfields Trust, I think those initiatives that enable, again, quick wins for people to build up a sense of confidence. And while I'm all in favor of, let's connect with the environment, isn't that a good thing? I think if people don't realize there's something in it for them economically, it's just going to be a hard sell. And it's amazing. It's a bit of a cliche, but when people get that job, and that lift that they have, suddenly all sorts of opportunities open up. And I'm an architect. I'm supposed to talk about buildings, but as my students will attest to, we talk about how do we create jobs through this, and we don't have anything without doing that. And for me, that's just central, how we can give people those opportunities. I'm sorry, the question.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lumley. I'm the CEO of Destination Plymouth. So thank you for inviting me here today. It's been really interesting. I guess I just wanted to respond a little bit. We absolutely accept some of those comments around the city and the identity and the place. And actually, because of that, just over 12 months ago, we started a piece of work to look at the brand narrative for the city. And we started internally. And one of the things that came out through our internal research was actually we need to get better at communicating between ourselves about some of the things that are happening here, because actually we're not as good as we could be. So one of the key things we're looking at is some of those networks and mapping and connections and connectivity. But also in order to actually respond outwards, we need to understand what people think of us as a city externally. So we're just about to commission some external perception research nationally across the whole of the country, which we hope will help us to understand what people think about Plymouth as a place, not just to visit. The work that Destination Plymouth does now covers a broader city marketing remit. So place to live and to work and to study, and what would attract them, who are our competitors, what are the key things within a sector. And Richard was fascinating, saying, I came here because there was a cluster of all these different things. So once we understand that, we'll then be able to think about how do we shape our narrative in a more contemporary, relevant way for those different people. And then, of course, how do we get there? So this is quite long-term piece of work. We're involving as many people as we can as stakeholders. I'm very happy to share more detail of that with any particular organisation, because it's important as many people as possible are involved in that. So please come and talk to me if you're interested and not already involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to raise something quite controversial and difficult. You were talking about the image of Plymouth, and a few things have been said today. I absolutely completely agree with you about the economics, and we know that epigenetically chronic stress not only kind of releases a whole load of metabolic changes which increase your propensity to heart disease, cancer, etc., but also that there can be epigenetic changes which go through the generations. So this is really, really important. Anyway, it's about Plymouth. So I was approached, and I imagine some other people in the room might have been approached recently by a businessman who's come from Australia. He's got a very famous wife. Have you been approached by this individual? And he was saying, I just don't understand. He said, I came here and I'd never seen such a fantastic seascape, and I don't understand why, there isn't middle class, upper class housing along that seascape. We could bring in, I think you mentioned an opera, didn't you? An opera house or something like that. We could start to bring in these cultural assets to encourage people with more money to trickle down some of that money into the system, etc., and things like that. And I mean, he just said, but it's just not going down well with the local council at all. And I said, well, they're probably a bit worried about gentrification, and maybe if you sort of talked about bringing in other opportunities for economic opportunities for the people. And it just kind of made me think about it, because we've described the city as a working class city. We talk about the fact that we want to empower local working class people. We actually asked them about whether they'd like to have middle class people coming in and bringing their money, or are we making middle class assumptions about what people want in terms of economic, drivers, impetus. I just think it's just really interesting that we talk about listening to other people, and I'm not always sure that we do. Sorry, that was a bit controversial, but
it feels to me like there's an opportunity, if there's a sense of a loss or a lack of identity, and yet we're also wanting a conversation with citizens and people in the city, and we want to ensure that those conversations lead to some kind of opportunities arising, then isn't there and I don't think any one of us could go along and say, well, here's the identity of Plymouth. This is just not going to work. The identity has got to come out of something that is real in the city somewhere. So aren't we kind of pointing at the real need to have deep conversations in community about not only what the community was and is, but could become, given everything else that we are facing, in order to build whatever it is that we're going to build. But until we start having the conversations, we can't really do anything that is going to be meaningful for the people, because we're just going to get the middle class, upper class gentrification, which would be lovely. It'll look great in all the brochures, but actually for the heart of Plymouth, it wouldn't really kind of make any difference whatsoever.
Hi, me again. So I'm also an outsider. I've come here for exactly the same reasons that Richard Thompson did, because of looking at where I wanted to do my PhD and the opportunities that existed within this city in the marine environment. I'm a marine ecologist by training. And one thing I would say is that I've had a number of friends. When I first arrived in Plymouth, I was coming from Seattle, and Seattle is a very dynamic, very diverse city. And one thing that I very much was made aware of immediately upon arrival at the rail station is that Plymouth was not that. Okay? And for a long time, I wanted to leave Plymouth and get the hell out of here as quickly as possible. But one thing that has really, I suppose, from my perspective of where I've sat, is that obviously that thinking has changed with my exploration of the surrounding areas. One thing that I did was to walk the entire Southwest Coast Path to see the beauty of this place that I called home, and to get to know the people along the way through various organizations and so on. That really gave me that anchor point. Now, I've had other friends that have come down to visit me. Obviously, Plymouth is way far away from anywhere else in the UK. So to try and get visitors down here is very, very difficult. Even though I'm like, yeah, but I can drive 4 hours and I can see you in Leicester or whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that beside the point. But a lot of them that had perhaps been here at some point in their life previously have had this mental image or visual of what Plymouth was. And that has stuck. And that is really unfortunate, that they see the city as something that it was. And what I try to tell them is that in the 17 years that I've been here, the evolution of this place, the place that we all call home, has been really quite extraordinary. And I think that for those that maybe have lived here their whole lives, maybe don't have that advantage of seeing exactly those changes. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And in terms of making it the city that we want it to be, obviously we have a lot of outsiders that call Plymouth home now. And so how is it that we as outsiders are, not only in terms of our working lives, but in our social lives, the social fabrics, our communities and so on, engaging? And I think one thing that the pandemic did well, anyway, is this idea that it did bring communities closer together, because that's all we had. I mean, because we were, like you say, cut off from everywhere, but also more or less cut off from each other, except for those that were literally on our doorstep. And I think reaching out to those people, and I know most of the people that live on my street, which is amazing. Most people are like, you do? I talk to them all the time, and you see people in the parks, and you talk to them all the time. And these are lifelong Janners, okay? And that's fine. And I think, to me, it's enriched my life. And I think where is that narrative is that we need to also have voices from these outsiders that have looked inside and what can we project outwards to that? Not just the people that have been lifelong Plymouthians, but also the people that now really feel enriched by living here. And I don't want to gentrify the Plymouth experience, but it is something that initially somebody said to me outside a pub, oh, you're over here, you're ruining everything about this country, because I was from the States, right? You have no purpose teaching here because you're going to change everything that we do. Yeah. And I was like, wow, I'm only here to help. And that's the way I saw it. But he didn't see it that way. So again, what is that narrative? What are we doing? How are we having these conversations? And it is literally it's all about storytelling. And I talk to this ad nauseum with my students. It's like, what is that personal hook with each individual, no matter what conversation you're having, at what level, at what time of your life, what time of day, what capacity? What is that personal hook to them? Why does it matter to them? And I think that's where we start the story in terms of that. Sorry.
I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to quickly say, as you probably guessed, I'm not from here either. For a long time, Plymouth was known as a city of departure. It's now a city of arrival. Earlier comments about, the white audience here. Plymouth is no longer white the way it was, 20 some years ago when I came. And I think part of that narrative is it needs to be rewritten. Yes, re-embrace the sea, but the way that Plymouth re-embraces the sea has to be different because things have changed. We can't move on. I think that goes back to the beginning theme of the day about resilience. We need to think about how we transform, because we can't go back to the dockyards and everything. We've got to reinvent ourselves. And that's a huge task, but I think it's a necessity. And maybe that experience of us foreigners, as it were, who've reinvented ourselves and coming here, may be a way of contributing to that. Again, thanks everybody for your participation. For those that can't stick around, glad you're able to make it. For those that can stick around, enjoy the afternoon. Picking up on something that Helen was talking about, it's going to be very chaotic, but nicely creative. So thank you.